How did a second-rate actor defeat the Soviet Union without firing a single shot? Ronald Reagan shouldn't have made it this far. A television host turned politician that many underestimated until he changed the course of world history. In this video, you're going to discover the secrets behind the most controversial politician of the 20th century, the man Wall Street adored and unions feared, who promised to make America great again decades before the phrase went viral, and whose economic decisions still determine your salary today. Here's what you'll learn. The communication technique Reagan mastered in Hollywood that made him unbeatable in political debates. This explains why current leaders still copy his style. The real reason behind the Soviet collapse, was Reagan a strategic genius, or did he just get historically lucky? Why the economic policies of the 80s are the exact reason there's so much inequality in 2025. If you've ever wondered why politicians talk a lot but say little, or how someone can be simultaneously a hero and a villain, depending on who's telling the story, this video will give you the tools to decode political power like never before. This isn't just about Reagan, it's about understanding how the game really works. Stay until the end to discover the hidden legacy Reagan left behind that nobody has told you about. Ronald Wilson Reagan was born on February 6, 1911, in Tampico, Illinois, a small town that at that time had fewer than 2,000 inhabitants. His father, Jack Reagan, worked as a traveling shoe salesman and was known for his outgoing and gregarious character. However, he struggled persistently to maintain steady employment due to chronic alcoholism that plagued him throughout his life. His mother, Nell Wilson Reagan, was deeply active in the local Methodist Church and devoted considerable energy to promoting social and religious activities that involved the broader community. She organized charitable events, prayer groups, and theatrical performances. During Reagan's childhood, the family moved frequently among various small towns throughout Illinois, nearly always living in unstable economic conditions that created uncertainty and financial stress. The town of Dixon eventually became the principal setting for Reagan's formative years and youth. The family settled there when he was 9 years old, and he remained until the beginning of his adult life. During the summer months, he worked as a lifeguard at Lowell Park on the Rock River, a position he held for 7 consecutive seasons from 1926 to 1933. According to local records that he meticulously maintained by carving notches in a log, he saved 77 people from drowning during his tenure. This job not only provided needed income, but also gave him confidence, responsibility, and local recognition as a dependable young man. Living with his father's alcoholism had a profound emotional and psychological impact on Reagan that would shape his character and worldview for decades to come. He later recounted painful episodes from his youth, in which he had to physically help his father, completely intoxicated and barely conscious, stagger into the house during harsh Illinois winters. He described finding his father passed out on the front porch in the snow. These difficult moments cultivated in him a critical view towards self-destructive behaviors, substance dependency, and the importance of personal responsibility. His mother, by contrast, played a decisive and formative role in his moral and intellectual development. It was she who introduced him to amateur theater, to dramatized biblical readings performed at church gatherings, and to reading clubs that discussed literature and current events. These cultural experiences awakened in Reagan a deep and lasting interest in public speaking, dramatic performance, and the power of narrative to move audiences. During his high school years at Dixon High School, Reagan participated actively in numerous extracurricular activities that developed his diverse talents. He played on the football team despite his modest size and poor eyesight, joined the swim team where he excelled, and became heavily involved in the drama club, performing in school plays. He wrote articles and opinion pieces for the school newspaper, demonstrating early writing ability. He also served as a speaker at various school events and assemblies, delivering addresses that impressed teachers and students alike. These varied experiences consolidated his communication skills from an early age and built the foundation for his future career as a performer and public figure. In 1928, Ronald Reagan enrolled at Eureka College, a small liberal arts institution affiliated with the Christian Church, also known as Disciples of Christ, located in Eureka, Illinois. The choice of this particular college was motivated primarily by a partial athletic and academic scholarship that made it financially possible for him to pursue higher education despite his family's severely limited economic resources during a difficult period. To cover the remaining expenses for tuition, room, board, and books, he worked multiple jobs on campus, including washing dishes in the dining hall and serving as an assistant in various campus services. This work ethic would become a defining characteristic throughout his life. Reagan studied economics and sociology, academic disciplines that exposed him to important debates about social organization, the proper role of the state in society, collective behavior, and economic systems. These theoretical frameworks and discussions would later reappear prominently in his political speeches and policy positions decades later. His college years coincided with a period of unprecedented economic turmoil. During his time as a student, the United States experienced the catastrophic collapse of the stock market in October 1929 and the subsequent onset of the Great Depression, which devastated the national economy and caused widespread unemployment, poverty, and social dislocation. This formative experience of witnessing economic crisis firsthand shaped his understanding of prosperity and hardship. In his sophomore year, Reagan was elected president of the Student Council amid a significant student protest movement against budget cuts and administrative decisions made by the college presidency without student input. His campaign speeches emphasized the fundamental right of students to participate meaningfully in decisions affecting their institution, an argument that was quite progressive and uncommon at that time when college administrations operated with little accountability to students. As president of the student body, he led direct negotiations with the administration, bringing student concerns to official meetings. He began participating in assemblies, serving on committees, and developing the negotiation and persuasion skills that would serve him throughout his career. Beyond student politics, Reagan participated actively and enthusiastically in both the artistic and athletic activities that Eureka College offered. He played as a guard on the football and basketball teams, demonstrating teamwork and competitive spirit, despite his nearsightedness, which required him to wear thick glasses off the field. He also competed in swimming events, drawing on his years of experience as a lifeguard. His constant presence on the stage of the campus theater club earned him considerable praise from audiences and critics for his natural expressiveness, his excellent memory for lines, and his ability to inhabit characters convincingly. In several theatrical productions, he interpreted both comic and romantic roles with enthusiasm and skill, which significantly increased his visibility and popularity among fellow students and faculty members alike. After graduating from Eureka College in 1932, Reagan faced the daunting challenge of finding meaningful employment in the midst of the Great Depression, when jobs were scarce and economic opportunities extremely limited. In 1932, he managed to secure a position as a radio announcer at Station WOC in Davenport in Iowa, where he narrated local sporting events for listeners throughout the region. His clear, resonant voice and his remarkable ability to create vivid mental images through descriptive language made him popular with audiences very quickly. His natural talent for engaging storytelling set him apart from other announcers. Shortly thereafter, his growing reputation earned him a better position at WHO, a prominent NBC affiliate station in Des Moines, where he narrated Major League Baseball games for eager fans across the Midwest. The baseball games he broadcast were transmitted solely based on brief telegraphic updates sent from the actual game locations, often hundreds of miles away. This meant that Reagan had to improvise the play-by-play action with fluidity, creativity, and dramatic emotion, filling in details and maintaining excitement during long stretches when no information arrived. He became adept at inventing plausible scenarios when the telegraph line went dead, once famously describing numerous foul balls during a technical delay. This routine of improvised narration significantly strengthened his ability to keep audiences engaged and entertained, even with extremely limited resources and information. He developed a distinctive narrative style that was direct, informal, conversational, and accessible to ordinary listeners. These were characteristics that would also prove invaluable in his subsequent career as a film actor, and much later, in the political arena. Reagan did not simply describe the mechanical action of the game. Instead, he created compelling mini-stories within the games, personalizing the players with invented backgrounds and colorful details, highlighting moments of greatest tension and drama, and making listeners feel as though they were present at the ballpark. In 1937, while accompanying the Chicago Cubs baseball team on a spring training trip to Southern California, Reagan managed to arrange a screen test at Warner Brothers Studios in Los Angeles, one of the major Hollywood film production companies. The screen test proved successful, largely thanks to his photogenic appearance, his naturally expressive face, his confident demeanor developed through years of public performance, and his previous experience in college theater productions. Warner Bros. Executives saw potential and offered him a contract with an initial modest salary of $200 per week. He began acting in low-budget films that were produced at great speed to fill the studio's release schedule. His first appearances were in B-movies, modestly budgeted productions intended primarily for audiences in neighborhood theaters, and as second features in double bills rather than prestigious prestige pictures. The role that gave him significantly greater visibility during this initial phase of his Hollywood career was that of George Gipp in the 1940 film Knute Rockne, All-American, in which he portrayed a talented college football player who dies tragically young. His performance was sincere and moving. The famous line, "Win just one for the Gipper," spoken by his dying character in an emotional deathbed scene, became an enduring symbol of inspiration and motivation in American popular culture. This phrase would later be deliberately reused and referenced throughout his political career, becoming one of his most recognizable associations and linking his Hollywood past to his political present. With the entry of the United States into World War II following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Reagan was called to military service in 1942 at the age of 31. However, due to severe vision problems and extreme nearsightedness that disqualified him from participating in combat operations or overseas deployment, he was assigned to the 1st Motion Picture Unit, a specialized division of the Army Air Forces with its base in Culver City, California, not far from Hollywood. There he participated in the production of approximately 400 training films, educational documentaries, and motivational pictures designed to train pilots, instruct gunners, boost morale among troops, and promote war bonds to the public. He served as an actor appearing on screen, a narrator providing voiceovers, and a supervisor reviewing and approving scripts for accuracy and effectiveness. After the end of the war in 1945, Reagan resumed his career as a film actor, returning to Warner Brothers and other studios to make pictures. However, he began to dedicate increasingly more time and attention to the Screen Actors Guild, commonly known as SAG, which was the labor union representing film actors in Hollywood. In 1947, he was elected president of SAG, a position of significant responsibility and influence that he would occupy for 7 non-consecutive terms until 1952, and then again from 1959 to 1960. His tenure as president of the union coincided with the beginning of intense congressional investigations into alleged communist influence and infiltration in the American film industry. The House Un-American Activities Committee, commonly referred to as HUSC, conducted hearings to identify suspected communists and sympathizers. As president of the union representing thousands of actors, Reagan found himself in a difficult position, navigating between competing pressures and conflicting loyalties. Reagan cooperated with HUAC and provided testimony, offering information about suspected communist infiltration and ideological influence in Hollywood productions and union activities. He served as an informant, though the full extent of his cooperation would not be known until FBI files were released decades later. Reagan adopted what he considered a moderate stance within SAG, attempting to balance external political pressures from government investigators and anti-communist activists with his responsibility to defend the labor rights and professional interests of union members. Although he publicly criticized communism as an ideology and expressed concern about Soviet influence, he also stated his opposition to the use of violence, intimidation tactics, and the creation of blacklists that ruined careers without concrete evidence or due process. In public hearings before HUAC, he testified that he considered ideological infiltration a real and serious threat to American institutions. However, he also stated that the union should not become an instrument of political persecution or abandon its core mission of protecting workers. During this period, Reagan also began to fundamentally re-evaluate his political positions and ideological orientation. Until that point, he had been closely identified with the Democratic Party and had expressed sympathies toward Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs, which had expanded government intervention in the economy during the Depression. He had campaigned for Democratic candidates and considered himself a New Deal liberal. However, he gradually began to adopt a more critical view of state interventionism, government regulation, and the expansion of federal power. His experiences dealing with studios, unions, and government officials in the tense context of the Cold War contributed significantly to this ideological shift. He increasingly came to view radical unionism, government control of industry, and centralized planning as threats to individual freedom and free enterprise rather than as solutions to social problems. Ronald Reagan married for the first time in 1940 to actress Jane Wyman, a fellow contract player at Warner Bros. Studios whom he had met through their work in the film industry. The couple had 2 children, Maureen, born in 1941, and Michael, who was adopted in 1945 after the couple experienced the tragic loss of a premature daughter. To the public, they represented a successful and glamorous Hollywood marriage within the entertainment world, frequently appearing together at premieres and industry events. However, significant personal differences and Reagan's growing dedication to union activism and political causes gradually generated serious tensions in the relationship. Wyman sought stability, privacy, and a focus on family life and her own acting career. Reagan, by contrast, became increasingly absorbed with his responsibilities as president of the Screen Actors Guild, with political debates about communism and with public affairs that took him away from home frequently. The separation occurred in 1948, amid considerable publicity. The divorce was finalized the following year in 1949, making Reagan the first divorced man who would eventually become President of the United States, breaking a long-standing taboo. During the difficult period following his divorce, Reagan concentrated his energies on his work in films and union activities, throwing himself into professional commitments. He maintained an active social life in Hollywood circles, attending parties and industry gatherings. It was in this context that he met Nancy Davis, a young actress under contract with MGM, who was seeking assistance regarding a case of mistaken identity related to political activities and suspected communist associations. Another woman with the same name had been linked to left-wing causes, and Nancy Davis feared being blacklisted by association. Reagan, serving at that time as president of SAG, personally intervened to resolve the misunderstanding and clear her name. This initial professional interaction gave rise to a close personal relationship between the two that quickly developed into romance. The marriage between Ronald Reagan and Nancy Davis was formalized on March 4, 1952, in a discreet ceremony attended by only a few close friends, with actor William Holden serving as best man. Unlike his first marriage, which had ended in disappointment and public scrutiny, this union would have a direct and profound impact on his public life and career trajectory. Nancy became a constant and devoted presence at social commitments and events related to the union and the film industry, rarely missing an opportunity to support her husband. More than merely an accompanying spouse, she actively functioned as an advisor and confidant, exercising a discreet but constant and powerful influence over professional decisions, career choices, and political positioning. Her protective instincts and strategic thinking would shape many of his most important decisions. With Nancy, Reagan had 2 more children, Patricia Ann, known as Patty, born in October 1952, and Ronald Prescott, known as Ron, born in May 1958. This new family structure contrasted sharply with the years of instability and disappointment he had experienced during his first marriage. Throughout the decade of the 1950s, the couple projected a cohesive and harmonious public image, carefully cultivated through photographs and interviews. They aligned themselves with the values of the traditional family, marital fidelity, and domestic stability that would later become central components of Reagan's political discourse and appeal to conservative voters who valued such traditional arrangements. In 1954, Ronald Reagan was hired by General Electric to host the weekly television program General Electric Theater, which was broadcast on CBS and became one of the most popular shows on American television. Beyond the television work itself, the contract included an unusual and significant clause that would profoundly shape his political development. He was required to visit General Electric factories and facilities throughout the country to meet and speak with assembly line workers, managers, and executives. Between 1954 and 1962, Reagan traveled extensively, visiting more than 130 GE plants across the United States. During these visits, he delivered speeches in which he addressed themes such as free enterprise, individual responsibility, the dangers of government overreach, and the importance of limited government intervention in the economy. During these factory visits and speaking engagements, Reagan gradually developed an increasingly structured and polished speech that he repeated and refined with each presentation, addressing what he saw as the risks of expanding state power and excessive government regulations. What had initially begun as motivational corporate content intended to boost employee morale slowly took on an unmistakably political tone as he became more confident in his message. He frequently cited and quoted conservative authors and economists such as Friedrich Hayek, whose book, The Road to Serfdom, warned against centralized planning, and Adam Smith, the 18th century philosopher who championed free markets. He began to openly and explicitly criticize the policies of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, which he had enthusiastically supported during the 1930s and 1940s. His ideological stance was evolving in alignment with the conservative shift that was transforming the Republican Party during the decade of the 1950s, as it moved away from the moderate Eisenhower approach toward a more assertively conservative position. The direct and sustained contact with business owners, engineers, plant managers, and factory workers reinforced in him a strong identification with the concept of personal merit and a corresponding rejection of what he viewed as government welfare and dependency. He saw in the factories a microcosm of the model of society that he considered ideal and worth preserving. It represented a functional hierarchy based on skill and effort, private initiative unencumbered by bureaucratic interference, and rewards distributed according to productivity and contribution rather than government mandate. This immersive experience also distanced him increasingly from the traditional political profile of Hollywood, which was leaning more and more toward liberal and progressive causes such as civil rights activism, opposition to the House Un-American Activities Committee, and support for expanded social programs. The public turning point in his political transformation occurred in 1964, when Reagan delivered a nationally televised speech in support of the presidential candidacy of Republican Senator Barry Goldwater, the conservative Arizona senator who was challenging President Lyndon Johnson. The speech, titled A Time for Choosing, and also known simply as The Speech, was broadcast nationwide on October 27, 1964. It presented compelling and passionate arguments against what Reagan characterized as the interventionist state, excessive tax burdens that stifled initiative, and the growing federal bureaucracy that threatened individual liberty. The speech raised over $1 million for the Goldwater campaign and instantly established Reagan as a powerful conservative voice. Ronald Reagan was elected governor of California in November 1966, defeating the incumbent Democrat Pat Brown by a significant margin with a campaign centered on themes such as containing public spending, combating rising crime rates, and reforming the education system. His candidacy received strong backing from business leaders, wealthy donors, and the conservative wing of the Republican Party, which viewed California as a crucial testing ground for right-leaning policies that could eventually be implemented nationally. When he assumed office in January 1967, he inherited a state experiencing rapid population growth and economic expansion. However, California was also marked by intense student protests against the Vietnam War, substantial budget deficits left by the previous administration, and escalating racial tensions in urban areas following the Watts riots of 1965. During his 2 terms as governor, which lasted from 1967 to 1975, Reagan confronted student movements directly and forcefully, particularly at the University of California at Berkeley, which he publicly characterized as a hotbed of radicalism, communist influence, and moral decay. He viewed the student activists with deep suspicion and regarded their protests as threats to social order. In 1969, during the People's Park controversy, he authorized the use of the California National Guard to suppress demonstrations on campus. This decision resulted in violent confrontations between troops and protesters, the use of tear gas and shotguns, the death of 1 bystander, and extensive coverage in the national press that brought the clash into living rooms across America. His forceful response consolidated his image as a law and order politician who represented authority and would not tolerate disruption. However, it also generated substantial criticism from civil libertarians, academics, and progressive activists who accused him of repression, excessive use of force, and trampling on free speech rights. In the economic sphere, Reagan sought to halt what he viewed as the unsustainable growth of public spending and to implement measures promoting administrative efficiency and fiscal discipline. One of his most prominent and controversial actions was the comprehensive reform of California's welfare system, which significantly tightened the eligibility criteria for accessing benefits and reduced the number of recipients. He argued that the previous system fostered dependency on government assistance, discouraged work, and needed to be fundamentally restructured to prevent widespread fraud and abuse. His reforms became a model for conservative welfare policies nationally. Ronald Reagan launched his first presidential campaign in 1968 while still serving as governor of California. However, he did not have sufficient support to seriously challenge Richard Nixon in the Republican Party primaries, as Nixon had carefully built a national organization and secured endorsements from key party figures. In 1976, he tried again with greater preparation and determination, directly challenging the incumbent President Gerald Ford for the leadership of the party. The contest was extremely close and fiercely fought, marked by significant ideological differences, particularly regarding the proper role of government in society and foreign policy toward the Soviet Union. Reagan attacked Ford's policy of détente as appeasement. Reagan ultimately lost by a narrow margin at the National Convention in Kansas City, falling just short of the delegates needed. However, his spirited campaign succeeded in mobilizing the conservative base of the party and demonstrated his appeal to grassroots activists who would prove crucial in future campaigns. After Ford's defeat to Democrat Jimmy Carter in the 1976 general election, Reagan remained at the center of public debate and political discourse, maintaining his visibility and influence. He delivered speeches across the country, wrote syndicated newspaper columns that appeared in hundreds of publications, and hosted radio commentaries that reached millions of listeners daily. Meanwhile, the United States faced a troubling combination of economic stagnation with low growth, stubbornly high inflation that eroded purchasing power, an energy crisis with long lines at gas stations, and a growing sense of public distrust in government institutions following Watergate. American foreign policy also appeared weakened on multiple fronts, with events such as the Iranian Revolution of 1979 that overthrew a key American ally, and the subsequent hostage crisis when Iranian revolutionaries seized the American embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans captive. During the Republican primaries of 1980, Reagan defeated rivals including George H.W. Bush, who had criticized Reagan's economic proposals as voodoo economics, and moderate Congressman John Anderson. He overcame initial resistance from the more moderate establishment wing of the party that viewed him as too conservative and ideological to win a general election. His message centered on economic recovery through tax cuts and deregulation, the reduction of government interference in business, the strengthening of the armed forces after perceived weakness under Carter, and the restoration of national optimism and American pride. The selection of Bush as his running mate was a strategic move designed to unify the party by bringing moderates into the fold and to attract centrist voters who might be skeptical of Reagan's conservative positions. In the general election campaign against incumbent President Jimmy Carter, Reagan skillfully capitalized on widespread dissatisfaction with the government's performance. He repeatedly pointed to the ongoing hostage crisis that made America appear impotent, rising unemployment and inflation that created economic misery, and the perceived loss of American prestige and influence on the international stage. His message resonated with voters who felt the country had lost its way. The decisive moment of the campaign came during the televised debate between the two candidates on October 28, 1980, held just 1 week before the election. Reagan appeared calm, confident and articulate throughout the 90-minute encounter. He contrasted sharply with Carter's defensive posture and detailed policy explanations. Reagan's closing question to voters, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" became one of the most effective political slogans in contemporary American history, encapsulating the economic anxiety and disappointment many felt. On November 4th, Reagan won decisively with a landslide victory, capturing 44 states and obtaining 489 electoral votes compared to Carter's 49, thus becoming the 40th President of the United States. On January 20th, 1981, Reagan was inaugurated as president in Washington in a ceremony held on the west front of the Capitol. Just minutes after he took the oath of office, in what many viewed as a final humiliation for Carter, the 52 American hostages who had been held captive in Iran were released after 444 days of captivity. This timing brought symbolic closure to the crisis that had begun under the Carter administration and had dominated news coverage for over a year. Shortly thereafter, on March 30th, 1981, just 69 days into his presidency, Reagan survived an assassination attempt perpetrated by John Hinckley Jr., a mentally disturbed young man who shot the president outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. Reagan was struck by a bullet that punctured his lung and came within inches of his heart. The event had enormous repercussions both nationally and internationally, raising questions about security and presidential protection. Upon assuming the presidency, Ronald Reagan proposed an economic agenda based on 4 fundamental pillars: reducing the growth of public spending, cutting taxes to stimulate investment and productivity, eliminating government regulations that constrained business activity, and controlling the money supply to combat inflation. The model, dubbed by the press as Reaganomics, combined influences from supply-side economics, which argued that tax cuts would generate enough growth to pay for themselves, with classical liberal ideas focused on free market principles and minimal government interference. One of the first major actions of his administration was to propose the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, which significantly reduced income tax rates for both individuals and corporations. The legislation cut the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 50% over 3 years and indexed tax brackets to inflation to prevent bracket creep. At the same time, monetary policy remained in the hands of the Federal Reserve under the leadership of Paul Volcker, who had been appointed during the Carter administration and enjoyed independence from political pressure. The Fed aggressively raised interest rates to combat the rampant inflation that had exceeded double digits at the end of the 1970s, reaching levels that threatened economic stability. The prime rate climbed above 20% in 1981. This tight money policy, while necessary to squeeze inflation out of the economy, contributed to a severe recession in 1981 and 1982, with unemployment reaching nearly 11%, the highest level since the Great Depression. The Reagan administration also implemented drastic cuts in social programs and discretionary federal spending across numerous departments and agencies, with the notable and significant exception of the defense sector, which received substantial budget increases. Reagan sought to rebuild American military strength after what he viewed as dangerous neglect. In August 1981, Reagan took decisive action when he fired more than 11,000 air traffic controllers who had declared an illegal strike in violation of federal law prohibiting strikes by government employees. He gave them 48 hours to return to work and followed through on his threat when most refused. The episode marked a significant turning point in labor relations at the federal level and sent ripples throughout the private sector. It was widely interpreted as a clear signal of firmness and resolve in dealing with union demands, emboldening employers across the country to take harder lines in negotiations. Between 1983 and 1984, the United States began to show clear and undeniable signs of economic recovery and expansion. GDP growth accelerated dramatically, with some quarters exceeding 7% annual growth. Inflation declined to controlled and manageable levels, falling from over 13% in 1980 to around 4% by 1984. Unemployment decreased gradually but steadily from its 1982 peak, though it remained higher than pre-recession levels. The Reagan administration enthusiastically attributed these positive results to the reduction of state intervention in the economy and to the liberation of productive activity from regulatory burdens and excessive taxation. The president claimed vindication for his economic philosophy. However, critics pointed out that the combination of significant tax cuts with substantial increases in military spending had produced a considerable and growing federal budget deficit. The national debt nearly tripled during Reagan's 2 terms, rising from under $1 trillion to nearly $3 trillion, raising concerns about long-term fiscal sustainability. During his second term in office, Ronald Reagan dramatically intensified his confrontational stance toward the Soviet Union, adopting sharply ideological rhetoric marked by powerful expressions such as "evil empire," which he famously and deliberately used in a landmark speech delivered to the National Association of Evangelicals in Orlando, Florida, in March 1983. The phrase caused tremendous international repercussions and sparked intense controversy across the political spectrum, drawing sharp criticism from arms control advocates, liberal commentators, and some European allies who feared it would poison the diplomatic atmosphere, while simultaneously earning enthusiastic praise from anti-communist hardliners, conservative intellectuals, and Cold War hawks who believed it accurately characterized Soviet totalitarianism. It made unmistakably clear Reagan's deeply held intention to position the United States not merely as a strategic adversary engaged in routine geopolitical competition and balance of power calculations, but rather as the righteous representative and defender of a political economic and moral system that was fundamentally and inherently superior to Soviet communism. He deliberately framed the Cold War struggle in stark, uncompromising terms of good versus evil, freedom versus tyranny, democracy versus dictatorship, creating a Manichaean worldview that left little room for moral equivalence or neutral positions. One of the most ambitious, expensive, and scientifically controversial initiatives of that entire period was the dramatic announcement of the Strategic Defense Initiative, commonly referred to by its acronym SDI, or nicknamed Star Wars, by skeptical critics and the popular media in reference to the science fiction film franchise, in a nationally televised address delivered from the Oval Office in March 1983. The extraordinarily ambitious project proposed developing a comprehensive, multi-layered space-based missile defense system utilizing advanced and largely unproven technologies, including high-powered lasers, kinetic energy weapons, particle beam weapons, and neutralize incoming Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles and their nuclear warheads before they could reach American territory and detonate over cities. Although the proposal immediately generated widespread technical skepticism from prominent scientists, physicists, and engineers who publicly questioned its technological feasibility and pointed out enormous technical obstacles, and simultaneously drew sharp criticism from fiscal conservatives and budget hawks deeply concerned about its staggering projected costs that were estimated to run into hundreds of billions of dollars over many years. It nevertheless had profound and significant strategic impact on the global balance of power. The Soviet Union, which carefully analyzed American military programs, perceived the ambitious plan as a serious existential threat to the long-standing doctrine of mutually assured destruction, universally known by its grimly appropriate acronym MAD, which had maintained a precarious strategic stability and prevented nuclear war for decades, through the grim guarantee and mutual understanding that both superpowers would be utterly annihilated in any nuclear exchange, with neither side able to defend itself. Soviet military planners and political leaders feared that an effective American missile shield would fundamentally alter this balance by giving the United States dangerous first strike capability, allowing it to launch a devastating nuclear attack and then defend against the weakened Soviet retaliation. Although the system was never fully developed, tested or deployed as originally envisioned in Reagan's ambitious speech, and many components remained in the research phase, SDI nevertheless contributed significantly to exerting substantial and unsustainable economic pressure on the already severely strained Soviet economic system, which was simultaneously facing mounting internal difficulties, including chronic technological stagnation, declining productivity, resource shortages, and the inability to match American defense spending without devastating domestic consequences. Despite his consistently aggressive anti-Soviet rhetoric throughout his first term and his massive military buildup that included deploying Pershing missiles in Europe, Reagan adopted a notably more pragmatic, nuanced, and flexible diplomatic line following the unexpected rise of Mikhail Gorbachev to supreme power in the Soviet Union in March 1985, after the deaths of 3 elderly Soviet leaders in rapid succession. The new Soviet leader, who was significantly younger and more dynamic than his predecessors, introduced comprehensive and far-reaching internal reforms embodied in the complementary policies of glasnost, a Russian term meaning openness, transparency, and the free flow of information, and perestroika, meaning fundamental restructuring of both the political system and the command economy. These radical reforms, which represented a dramatic break from decades of Soviet orthodoxy, aimed to reverse the accelerating economic collapse, address widespread corruption and inefficiency, modernize the ossified Soviet regime, and restore international competitiveness. Reagan, despite his deep ideological anti-communism, recognized this fundamental change in Soviet approach and leadership style, saw a genuine opportunity for historic progress in superpower relations, and decided to test whether Gorbachev's reforms represented authentic change or merely tactical maneuvering. He initiated a series of high-level diplomatic meetings with Gorbachev that marked a dramatic and unexpected new phase in the relationship between the two nuclear-armed superpowers after decades of hostility. The first summit meeting was held in Geneva, Switzerland, in November 1985, where the two leaders, accompanied by small delegations, established surprising personal rapport and mutual respect despite their profound ideological differences and opposed worldviews. This initial meeting was followed by subsequent summits in Reykjavik and Iceland in October 1986, where they came tantalizingly close to agreeing on sweeping nuclear reductions, in Washington in December 1987, and finally in Moscow in May 1988, with each successive meeting advancing the dialogue, building trust and producing concrete results. The sustained bilateral negotiations between the superpowers, conducted by teams of diplomats and arms control experts over many months, culminated with the signing of the historic Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, universally known as the INF Treaty, in a formal ceremony in the East Room of the White House in Washington in December 1987, witnessed by dignitaries from around the world. The groundbreaking agreement established the complete elimination of an entire class of nuclear-armed ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers that were deployed in Europe and posed grave threats to both sides. It was the first arms control agreement in the nuclear age that actually contemplated and mandated the physical destruction of existing nuclear arsenals rather than merely limiting future production, capping deployment numbers, or restricting new technologies. The treaty created unprecedented and intrusive mechanisms for mutual verification and transparency, including mandatory on-site inspections at military facilities, exchange of detailed data on missile locations and capabilities, and continuous monitoring provisions that allowed each side to verify full compliance and detect any cheating. This historic achievement marked a significant breakthrough in Cold War relations after decades of mistrust, demonstrated conclusively that genuine progress toward nuclear disarmament was not merely theoretical, but practically achievable, and offered hope that the dangerous confrontation between the superpowers might finally be winding down. Between 1986 and 1987, the White House confronted a severe and potentially devastating political crisis, after the revelation of a clandestine scheme that violated multiple federal laws, congressional mandates, and international guidelines. The complex case involved the secret sale of military weapons and spare parts to Iran, a nation then under strict embargo and officially designated as a state sponsor of terrorism, with the stated objective of securing the release of American hostages held captive by militant groups affiliated with Hezbollah, operating in Lebanon. The substantial funds obtained from these illicit arms transactions were then covertly diverted through secret Swiss bank accounts to finance the Contras anti-communist rebel militias that were fighting an insurgent war against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, despite explicit congressional prohibition of such aid through the Boland Amendment. The first public denunciations and revelations emerged in November 1986, initially stemming from investigative reports published in obscure Lebanese newspapers and subsequently picked up by major American news organizations, including major networks and newspapers. At first, the White House categorically denied any involvement or knowledge of such operations, dismissing the reports as false and unfounded. However, leaked internal documents, detailed memoranda, and compelling testimonies from military officers, intelligence operatives, and national security advisors gradually confirmed the undeniable existence of the covert operation and its scope. The crisis intensified dramatically and reached a critical point when it became abundantly clear that the elaborate scheme had been coordinated and executed by senior members of the National Security Council operating within the White House itself, with either partial or complete knowledge of key figures in the government, including National Security Advisors Robert McFarlane and John Poindexter. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a Marine officer assigned to the NSC, who was identified as one of the principal architects and operational coordinators of the fund diversion scheme, became the highly visible public face of the scandal when he testified before joint congressional committees in televised hearings that captivated the nation. North appeared in his military uniform and delivered defiant testimony defending his actions as patriotic. The response of President Reagan oscillated inconsistently between outright denial of wrongdoing, expressed astonishment and claims of ignorance about operational details, and eventual attempts at correction and damage control as evidence mounted. In carefully crafted official statements and press conferences, he firmly maintained that he had not personally authorized the controversial diversion of funds toward the Contras, though he did eventually admit and acknowledge that his administration had approved the sending of weapons to Iran as part of a strategic opening. He claimed he had been inadequately informed by subordinates. The extensive investigations carried out by the Tower Commission, an independent review board, and by special committees of both houses of Congress revealed serious and systematic failures in oversight mechanisms, management controls, and accountability structures within his administration that had allowed rogue operations to proceed unchecked. The scandal had a profound and lasting impact on the public image of the Reagan government, which until that dramatic moment had been widely perceived as disciplined, competent, well-organized, and efficient in its operations. Reagan's approval ratings fell notably and significantly, dropping by double digits in some polls as Americans questioned his management abilities. The case reopened contentious debates about the appropriate scope and limits of executive power in matters of foreign policy, presidential accountability to Congress, and the balance between national security secrecy and democratic oversight. Additionally, it reignited sharp criticism of American interventionism in Central America and Latin America more broadly, especially in countries governed by leftist movements or parties that opposed U.S. interests. The case generated numerous criminal indictments, controversial convictions that were later overturned on technical grounds, forced resignations and dismissals of senior officials, and disputed pardons issued by Reagan's successor. It also triggered a prolonged and complex judicial process involving multiple defendants that extended well into the beginning of the 1990s and left lasting questions about accountability at the highest levels of government. Ronald Reagan left the presidency in January 1989 with remarkably high approval ratings hovering around 63%, concluding a consequential 8-year administration that fundamentally transformed American politics, reshaped the Republican Party, and altered the nation's ideological trajectory. After leaving office and transferring power to his vice president, George H.W. Bush, he established his post-presidential life in the affluent Bel Air neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, together with Nancy, maintaining a relatively moderate public presence through occasional paid speeches to corporate audiences, rare public appearances at Republican events, and the publication of memoirs. In November 1991, he officially inaugurated the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum in Simi Valley, California, a sprawling Spanish mission-style complex built on a hilltop with panoramic views. The library became his principal point of connection and encounter with admirers, supporters, scholars, and researchers seeking to study his papers and legacy. In November 1994, Reagan made the deeply personal decision to announce publicly that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a progressive degenerative neurological condition. He did so through a handwritten letter addressed to my fellow Americans that had enormous emotional impact and national repercussions when it was released to the press. In the brief but moving text, written in his own distinctive handwriting, he expressed his profound gratitude to the American people for the honor of serving as their president. He anticipated his definitive and permanent retirement from public life as the disease progressed. The letter was widely viewed as a final gesture of personal dignity, courage, and characteristic grace under difficult circumstances. It also helped significantly to raise awareness and visibility around Alzheimer's disease, which until that time had been relatively little discussed openly in American society, despite affecting millions of families. There was considerable stigma attached to dementia. In the years following the announcement, Reagan remained largely in seclusion at his Los Angeles home, with his deteriorating state of health carefully protected and shielded from public view by his devoted family, particularly Nancy, who became his primary caregiver and fierce protector of his privacy and dignity. Following his death on June 5, 2004, at the age of 93 after a decade-long decline from Alzheimer's, Reagan received extensive formal and popular tributes befitting his stature as a transformative president. His elaborate state funeral, the first for a president since Lyndon Johnson in 1973, brought together current and former heads of state from around the world, all four living former presidents, dignitaries, and thousands of ordinary citizens who waited in long lines to pay their respects. The ceremonies included a formal lying-in state in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, where over 100,000 mourners filed past his flag-draped casket, followed by a national funeral service at Washington National Cathedral, attended by 4,000 guests, and finally burial at sunset at his presidential library in Simi Valley overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The extensive live television transmissions of the week-long funeral events and the declared days of national mourning reflected the profound impact of his figure in American collective memory and the emotional connection many citizens felt. At the same time, the extensive media coverage surrounding his death reignited and intensified the ongoing debate about his complex political legacy in academic circles, journalistic commentary, and partisan political discourse. Since that time, his presidency has been the subject of constant re-evaluations and reinterpretations by historians, political scientists, and biographers, examined in light of newly released archival documents, declassified materials, fresh historical interpretations, evolving ideological perspectives, and the dramatic changes in the global geopolitical landscape since the end of the Cold War that he helped bring about. Ronald Reagan was a transformative and polarizing leader who generated sharply divided opinions across the political spectrum, but who undeniably and profoundly molded modern American politics, reshaped conservative ideology, and left an enduring mark on both domestic policy and international relations. He was celebrated as a hero and visionary by fervent admirers who viewed him as the savior of American capitalism, while simultaneously condemned as a villain by critics who saw him as callous toward the poor and minorities. He was hailed as a tireless defender of economic liberty and free market principles by supporters, yet denounced as the primary architect responsible for the systematic dismantling of the New Deal welfare state and social safety net by detractors. His legacy remains intensely contested, but ultimately and undeniably, his far-reaching influence transcended party lines national borders, and multiple decades, fundamentally altering the trajectory of American conservatism and inspiring similar movements worldwide. What continues to generate the most heated debate among historians, economists, and political analysts is the lasting and multifaceted impact of his consequential decisions and policies. Did Reagan successfully save and revitalize the stagnant American economy through tax cuts and deregulation, ushering in decades of growth and prosperity? Or did he instead lay the foundational groundwork for the stark income inequality, wealth concentration, declining social mobility, and erosion of the middle class that we continue to grapple with today? Leave your opinion in the comments section below. We genuinely want to know what you think about Reagan's complex legacy and whether you view him as hero or villain. And of course, if you found this content valuable, informative, and thought-provoking, please subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you never miss an upload. In upcoming videos, we are going to continue exploring pivotal figures, crucial decisions, and transformative themes that fundamentally changed the course of history and shaped the world we inhabit today. If you do not subscribe, you are going to miss in-depth analysis, my rigorous research, and nuanced perspectives that nobody else is providing with this level of depth, clarity, and intellectual honesty.